What's up, everybody? It's Peter Tragos, the lawyer you know, and on this channel, we break down the trials and cases you care most about so you can understand how the American civil and criminal justice system works. And we try to make sure you understand what your rights are in every situation, which is why we try to walk you through the entire legal process while also answering your insightful questions along the way. And while it's not legal advice, it's always exciting. So buckle up for another episode of The Lawyer You Know. What's up, everybody? Sorry I'm a little bit late. We had some technical difficulties. As you know, I'm still trying to get fully set up at home, and my headphones will not connect, so I'm still working on that. And yeah, John, I'm talking about the sound when I play the video. So we'll see when I play videos how it sounds, if I can get the headphones to connect. Listen, it's about as easy as possible. I have a MacBook Pro and I have AirPods, so you would think it'd be very easy to set up just by pushing this little button, but sometimes it does not. So today's one of those times. We're still going to play the video. I'll mute my mic so there shouldn't be any echo or background noise or anything like that. You guys will let us know, I'm sure, in the chat if the sound is off. So today we're talking about Alec Baldwin. We did a short yesterday when we heard that criminal charges are coming for Alec Baldwin. They are not filed yet, and Hannah Gutierrez-Reed. And those charges are involuntary manslaughter charges, which are fourth-degree felonies, carry with it 18 months to 3 years, potentially, depending on how they charge. And if there are some enhancements, maybe even more. There are 2 counts of involuntary manslaughter. So it's going to be an interesting ride here for criminal charges that we kind of always expected. A lot of people, including my dad, thought they weren't going to bring criminal charges because it was Alec Baldwin, because it was clearly an accident. Some of you on the short that I posted said you think it's horrible that they would bring criminal charges when something was obviously totally an accident. There was no intent for Alec Baldwin. He didn't mean to do anything wrong. He didn't mean to hurt anybody. And I agree with all of that he didn't mean to hurt anybody. He didn't mean to do anything wrong. But in our civilized society, and this is kind of just off the jump, talking involuntary manslaughter, because a lot of you had questions about that. So off the jump, we have criminal statutes for involuntary manslaughter. And I think every state, I know Florida does, I know New Mexico does, I know most states do. So that certain activities that you partake in, if you just throw caution to the wind, you don't care about anybody else's safety, or you don't care enough about anybody else's safety. So you do what you want for whatever reason it is, whether it's making a movie, whether it's fun, whether it's adrenaline, whether it's to make money, and you do not act as any reasonable person would or should. And money is not enough, right? There are a lot of people that have either a lot of money where it doesn't really matter. You can sue them and they can just give you rights to a movie deal and their life doesn't change that much. Or there are some people that have no money. So it's no risk to them to do certain things because they're uncollectible and they just do what they want for fun or for whatever. And a civil lawsuit does nothing. I have that conversation with my clients all the time. They say, well, this person changed my life by hitting me and driving with no license, no insurance. They stole the car. I want to sue them personally. And what happens in those situations is if we ever sue those people personally, which usually we don't because it's spending thousands of dollars of our clients' money to get nothing in return, is at the end of the day, we get a piece of paper, and depending on your jurisdiction, you have a judgment against them for 5, 7, 10, 20 years that they never pay and nothing ever changes. So sometimes there's just really no civil repercussion for certain things that people do. And if somebody dies or somebody's life has changed forever in this situation, the victim's family's lives, criminal statutes do provide the necessary deterrence of that kind of activity. And what's really interesting when we talk about involuntary manslaughter specifically as a criminal charge is it sounds a lot like all of the cases that I prosecute as a civil lawyer, right? So as a prosecutor in criminal cases, it was different when I did that, right? But a lot of that is intent, right? They did something wrong. They broke the law. They meant to hurt somebody. They meant to do these drugs. They meant to steal this. But when we talk involuntary manslaughter, and we're going to listen to the prosecutors talk about it a lot, it sounds almost verbatim what we put in our complaints. This person knew or should have known what they're doing is dangerous. This person knew or should have known that somebody was going to get hurt if they continued along this path, yet they continued. Profits over people, right? The age-old theme in closing arguments. That's what this sounds like when you hear these lawyers explain it. And I had so many questions when I first heard involuntary manslaughter. And we're going to get to the interviews with the district attorney and the prosecuting attorney. We even have some interviews with the special prosecutor in this case, because she was brought in, and she wasn't in the initial interview that I saw with CNN, but she was in some later interviews. So we're going to listen to, all right, my AirPod's connected. Look at that. Enough of explanation to give me time to connect these. Good. So we're going to listen to not only the actual DA in New Mexico where this took place, but we're also going to listen to the special prosecutor they brought in. And we've been following this case for a long time. So we knew they asked for extra money. They didn't get all of it, but they got a lot of the extra money. They brought in a special prosecutor, and they are going to prosecute Alec Baldwin and Hannah Gutierrez Reed for involuntary manslaughter. And the definition of involuntary manslaughter is the commission of an unlawful act. So what's an unlawful act? In this case, it's probably negligent mishandling of a weapon. Or in the commission of a lawful act, like making a movie, that might produce death in an unlawful manner or without due caution and circumspection. And that, to me, is the most appropriate if we are going to file criminal charges. And like I've said in lots of cases, just because criminal charges are filed does not mean anybody did anything wrong, does not mean anybody's going to get convicted. They're presumed innocent. But under the facts that we know, I can understand why they charge something like this. And there has been some comments that they've overcharged Alec Baldwin, that they're trying to get their 15 minutes of fame. I will just tell you, in almost every circumstance I've ever come across as a prosecutor, defense attorney, seeing my dad's cases, whatever it may be over the last 10 years, prosecutors always charge the most serious crime that the facts allow. They almost never say, I think we could prove this, but I'm going to go ahead and go down 2 levels. So these are no different than any other prosecutors prosecuting the most serious crimes that they could have. Now, in my short, I said, but I think there's a statute there. Ooh, Mr. Smart Guy here thinks there's a statute here that Alec Baldwin might actually be more appropriate for, or might even plead to. And that was what I've already mentioned, the negligent mishandling of a firearm. And I thought that was going to be some, really interesting discussion point. But instead, we figured out that they already knew about this, and this was already discussed. And David Halls, the assistant director who allegedly handed Alec Baldwin the gun and said it was a cold gun and whatever, he has already pled to that misdemeanor, negligent mishandling of a firearm. And what does that carry with it? It carries a 6-month probation with a suspended sentence, meaning he's not going to prison. His prison sentence is suspended. So if he screws up or does something really bad, or somebody else dies on a movie set where he hands him a gun that says cold gun, then he could go to prison for this prison sentence, which is probably up to a year if it's a misdemeanor in New Mexico. But he's getting a suspended sentence, 6 months probation, and you better believe he's going to testify against them. Now, there's just a sneaking suspicion to me, listening to how the lawyers handled this case, that this deal was also offered to Alec Baldwin and Hannah Gutierrez Reed. I could be wrong about that. But they offer this deal to David Halls. And if they're not trying to make a name for themselves, but they are trying to get justice for Helena Hutchins, just letting it go by the wayside. They say, nobody's above the law. So offer them this negligent mishandling of a firearm. They plead to it. They have criminal charges now on their record. They have probation. They probably take some courses. They apologize, and everything goes away in 6 months. It seems like a win-win for everybody. Unless you're Alec Baldwin and you've gone out and done these interviews and your lawyers are saying you're going to fight this till the end and you're going to win. And so now it seems like you can't really plead to that. And I'll never say never, because a lot can happen throughout the course of a case. But if that's all you're looking at, right? If that's your worst day, and we've talked about the criminal process and the sentencing process and how people plead to stuff that they say they didn't do all the time, because you're looking at life in prison. If they offer you 5 years and you're 25 years old, sometimes you'll plead to it even if you didn't do it. And that's sad and that's horrible and that's a problem in our system, but it's something that we, are still trying to work through. But if this is the worst case scenario, if worst case scenario is he's going to get some kind of later, he's going to be able to plead to a deal like this with a suspended sentence and 6 months probation, you might as well try to prove you're innocent. Now, another thing that frustrates the heck out of me is when prosecutors hammer you harder for exercising your constitutional right to go to trial, but you better believe if he goes to trial and loses, he's going to end up with a much worse sentence than David Halls. So those are all things that we're going to continue to discuss, and I'm going to answer your questions throughout. But I do want to listen to a few of these interviews because they're very, very interesting. and they answer so many of the questions that we had. And I'm going to bring up the questions kind of as they're answering them. One's about 10 or 15 minutes. The other ones are just a couple minutes. So, Lisa, I'll bet Alec would want charges brought if someone shot him or a family member, even if an accident. Yes. And a lot of people were making this comment as well. Stephanie, how do these charges of mishandling a firearm relate to cases like the 6-year-old who brought a gun to school, parents being charged? So I don't think that's, I mean, I guess it could be negligent handling, meaning they didn't like secure it enough. But to me, there are a lot of other charges that could potentially come through that case. I haven't looked into it enough to see what they're actually charged with. But I think there could also be some just negligent parenting going on there as well. And similar charges to what we have in the Crumbly parents case. So we'll keep an eye on that one, Stephanie. Yes, Michelle, thank you. All right, let's get to some of these videos here, starting with, I want to start with the 15-minute one. Yeah. District Attorney explains the charges. We'll go on just maybe 1.25 speed.
Since the charging decision. Josh?
And this was her first interview.
Yeah, thanks. I'm here with the district attorney. Madam District Attorney, thank you for speaking with us. I just want to start. How did you come to this prosecutive decision?
Well, along with my special prosecutor, we got the report from the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office. We initiated an extensive review of that, and I will say that it was a well investigated case. But we had some follow up that we had to speak with some experts. And once we read through everything and researched.
So the first indication right there, kind of what we were saying from the beginning. Michelle, welcome to the member crew. A lot of new members here, Kaylee as well. So right off the jump, she says the investigation was great, but we had to talk to some of our own experts. And we said from the very beginning, this was going to be an expert intensive case, because when you have a negligence case, which is literally what I do every day, you have to prove what the duty was. What is reasonable care when it comes to movie sets, when it comes to handling of guns, when it comes to prop guns, when it comes to prop bullets? What is that duty of care? And who knew that duty or should have known it? And Alec Baldwin's own words are going to come back to haunt him over and over again, which is the first thing we said when he gave that interview, when he said, I know guns, I've been trained, I've been on sets all the time. He is admitting right there that he knows what the duty of care is. And he undertakes it every time he picks up a gun. He undertakes it every time he's a producer on a film, regardless of what he says is I had no control. So his own words, like we've said in every single case, that's the hardest thing to get over, is when a jury hears it come from your mouth. By the way, that comment about redirecting, we are going to talk about the second gag order in the Brian Kohberger case. We are going to compare it to the first gag order, see what's different, and see who the judge is really pointing this one at. It's going to be an interesting discussion, but we're going to do it after we finish up with Alec Baldwin.
Research the case law and the law here in New Mexico, we realized that we believe that there was probable cause to charge Alec Baldwin and Hannah Gutierrez-Reed with involuntary manslaughter.
And what were some?
So some people made fun of her for saying they researched the case law when she's the DA. I will just tell you right now, if a prosecuting attorney or defense attorney does not read the statute before they charge a crime, it's borderline malpractice. I don't care how well you think you know the statutes. That's why I like to read them on here. I know what involuntary manslaughter is. I can give you the Cliff's Notes version of it, but I'd rather just read you what the words actually say. I sat for 4 hours in the Civil Procedure Rules Committee at the Florida Bar Convention yesterday, and you would have fallen out of your chair if you heard the 50 or so lawyers in the room discuss where a comma went and how a lawyer could say, well, this is actually separate. If they filed the motion to dismiss for forum nonconvenience, and then there's a comma in there, they would think they would have to do something additional. I mean, it's wild. So these people labor over the verbiage and constructing of these statutes. So when you're going to charge something, she should research the case law and the statutes, make sure it applies, especially when we're dealing with a firearm, a negligent use of a firearm. Is it simple negligence? Is it recklessness? What is the bar? What is the level that they have to prove? She should be doing that before she makes every charging decision. And they do it a little bit more when they know high-powered, high-priced defense lawyers are coming to defend Alec Baldwin. They want to make sure all their I's are dotted and T's are crossed.
What were some of the key pieces of evidence that you used that factored into that decision?
Well, that there was such a lack of safety and safety standards on that set, that there were live rounds on set. They were mixed in with regular dummy rounds. Nobody was checking those, or at least they weren't checking them consistently. And then they somehow got loaded into a gun, handed off to Alec Baldwin. He didn't check it. He didn't do any of the things that he was supposed to do to make sure that he was safe or that anyone around him was safe. And then he pointed the gun at Helena Hutchins and he pulled the trigger.
So she just said a lot of things there. a lot of things they're going to have to prove, but also a lot of different steps of negligence, which in my cases and in her case, any individual reckless or negligent act, depending on how you read the statute, could convict of involuntary manslaughter. The set was unsafe because he's not just an actor, he's a producer. There were complaints that were not heeded. Dummy rounds got on the set. How? I don't know. They don't necessarily have to prove how, just that Alec Baldwin should have known or knew or should have known. He should have put people in place to protect that and fix that. Then the dummy rounds made their way into a gun. Then he pointed the gun at Elena Hutchins and he pulled the trigger. That's going to be a serious area of contention because we all know Alec Baldwin over and over again has said he did not pull the trigger. We had some experts talk about whether or not you can fire without it. Other people have said you can, whether or not you can fire without it. Well, they have experts from the FBI that they are relying on as the state, which we talked about. This is going to be expert intensive. The duty of care. And then now also we're seeing how the gun works. Gun experts are going to be front and center in this case. So she's going to have to prove what the negligence was and how easily it could have been prevented.
You talked about the safety on the set. As part of your investigation, was there one thing that was done or one thing that was said that sealed it for you that this should be prosecuted?
No, actually, I think it was the totality of the circumstances, that this was a really fast and loose set and that nobody was doing their job. There were 3 people that if they had done their job that day, this tragedy wouldn't have happened. And that's David.
Fast and loose. They weren't doing their job. If 3 people would have just done their job, then this would have never happened. That's negligence. I mean, that's literally the things I say in my closing argument. If they would have just done what they were supposed to do, if this doctor wouldn't have screwed up, if this person would not have ran the red light, if this person wouldn't have been texting and driving, if this truck driver wouldn't have been drinking, if they just would have done their job the way they were supposed to, then nobody would have gotten hurt.
David Halls, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, and Alec Baldwin. If they had just done their basic duties, we wouldn't be standing here.
Can you help our viewers understand? So the state officials did a report. It was signed by the chief medical investigator saying that there was no compelling evidence that this was intentional, right?
Right.
So help our viewers understand, if it's an accident, which most people seem to think it is, why is that a crime?
Because just because it's an accident doesn't mean that it's not criminal. Our involuntary manslaughter statute covers unintentional killings, unintentional homicides. The rest of our homicide statutes cover intentional, but unintentional means they didn't mean to do it. They didn't have the intent to kill. But it happened anyway, and it happened because of more than mere negligence, because of they didn't exercise due caution or circumspection, and that's what happened here.
And what's
and there she is quoting the statute. They didn't exercise due caution or circumspection. That's straight from the statute. I think she does great, personally.
Response to, there might be people in Baldwin's camp who say that you were overcharging this.
Well, we disagree, and we're going to be taking that in front of a judge and allowing the judge to decide on probable cause. But we think that there is enough there, more than enough there, to move forward on these charges and possibly to get through the preliminary hearing stage and on to trial.
Can you just break down the specific?
So she says possibly get through the preliminary hearing stage. That's interesting because most prosecutors, they always think they're going to get through the preliminary hearing stage. So I think that was probably just a misstatement from her.
Charges. So I was reading through your announcement. You say that both Hannah Gutierrez-Reed and Alec Baldwin have been charged with 2 counts of involuntary manslaughter. Can you unpack that? What was that mean?
Well,
I can't say, though, just because I'm thinking back possibly and how I lawyer, and I try to get all the information and I try to use it appropriately. And if I'm when I'm making my argument at the preliminary hearing, I may even say, Judge, in her interview, she said she'll possibly get through the preliminary hearing stage. This is not a case about possibilities. You've got to have probable cause to get through this. You've got to have a more likely than not. You've got to have beyond a reasonable doubt. Those are the standards we're talking about in criminal cases, not all possibilities. I can't say I wouldn't use that because she did say it. And you got to have more than that to prosecute these crimes.
Those are 2 counts in the alternative. So when this goes in front of a jury, the jury could find they're guilty on both, but since they're in the alternative, they will only be sentenced as to 1 count. The first part of the involuntary that we'll be charging is that they acted without due caution and circumspection, meaning they weren't just negligent in their duties, but that they were on notice, that they had duties, and that they should have done or not done something that didn't happen on that set, meaning they should have checked the bullets. They should have checked the gun. They shouldn't have even been using a live gun that day. They should have been using a rubber or a plastic gun. All of these things go together and show that there was just this complacency, lack of care on that set. And it's more than negligence. And I would say it rises to recklessness. The other is goes hand in hand.
So she's saying it's more than negligence. She thinks it could rise to recklessness. There are certain cases that say she might not even have to prove that bar, but at this point, she's saying it's so bad. It's even worse than it needs to be. And that happens a lot of times in my cases as well, where we're not going for gross negligence, but we'll say, this isn't just negligence, this is gross negligence. It's not unusual for lawyers to say that because, I mean, in a lot of these situations, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. And again, Alec Baldwin can point the finger at a lot of people for a lot of the negligence she's describing, except for pointing the gun and pulling the trigger. And I think he knows that, which is why he was so adamant that he didn't pull the trigger and he was following Helena Hutchinson's instructions the entire time.
In hand with a misdemeanor, a petty misdemeanor here in New Mexico called negligent use of a deadly weapon. And that is that someone handled or used or touched a gun in a negligent manner. And to
me, that fits best. If I'm just saying it honestly, and as a defense lawyer, that's the charge I would be most nervous of. I think they can beat involuntary manslaughter for a couple different ways, but if that's what was charged and that's the underlying unlawful act that they're using for involuntary manslaughter, then that might be a well pieced together case. And that's what she's talking about. It's either the lawful act that ends up in a death because of you didn't use reasonable care, or an unlawful act and somebody dies, but it wasn't intentional. If this is the unlawful act, man, I think that is kind of the perfect statute for these facts. I think they could still win, right? Because there's a jury system. And if a jury doesn't think Alec Baldwin did anything wrong and they think that he did exercise reasonable care and it was other people's jobs to do what they were supposed to do before they handed him the gun, so there was nothing he could have possibly done, he could still win. But I'm just saying, based on the facts, that seems like the better charge to me is that petty misdemeanor.
Once we show that, then that can lead to the second alternative theory of involuntary manslaughter.
Does it matter for an actor? Obviously, there's been this discussion about safety on sets. The last time I interviewed you, you even mentioned like you were surprised to learn that these sets operate like this in some circumstances. But if you have an actor with what he or she thinks is a prop gun, not a real gun, is that actual negligence if it turns out that gun can actually shoot?
So this goes with Kuvira's question here.
More than that. Every person that handles a gun has a duty to make sure that if they are going to handle that gun, point it at someone and pull the trigger, that it is not going to fire a projectile and kill someone. And this is really about justice for Helena Hutchins. We've talked to many actors, A-list and otherwise, that have said that they always check their guns, or they have someone check it in front of them. So it's not.
So my question from the jump has been, are we going to hear from any of these A-list actors? Are they going to be expert witnesses in this case? Are they going to testify to what their training is that's similar to Alec Baldwin's? They've been on less movie sets with guns than Alec Baldwin because we know how many he's been on since he keeps talking about it and there's IMDb. Are they going to be witnesses in this case? Are we going to hear from George Clooney and some of the other people that have given interviews saying that they always check the gun? They're supposed to check the gun. There was another question on here that says, that asked something like, how would he know if there were live rounds on set? Well, some of them said it's heavier. They look different. You can tell just by holding the gun if there's dummy rounds versus if they're live rounds. Really interesting stuff to me here. Really interesting stuff.
An actor doesn't get a free pass just because they're an actor. And that's what's so important, is that we're saying here in New Mexico, everyone's equal under the law. Everyone has to follow their duties and do what's right and take that safety into account so that this doesn't ever happen again.
And is Baldwin being charged as an actor who was holding the gun or as a producer on the set who was negligent about the safety standards? Can you help describe that?
He's being charged as both. He was the actor that pulled the trigger. So certainly he's charged as an actor, but also as a producer, he also had a duty to make sure that the set was safe. And we know from our investigation that there had been accidental misfires prior to this, that there were people that were complaining about safety on set. And so he should have been aware that safety was an issue on set. And then as an actor that day, he should have checked that gun, checked those projectiles.
Just a couple more questions, because I know your time is short. Do you expect any type of plea agreement from Baldwin or Gutierrez-Reed? Have those discussions started?
That's not something I can comment at this time. It's unethical.
So again, this is what I was saying, right? And she doesn't say no, which is interesting, but she said she's not going to comment, which is appropriate and good for her. But I think a lot of people wondering, why in the world would you say charges are coming later this month? Why wouldn't you just bring the charges? They did a ton of interviews. What's going on? To me, this might even be a bluff by the prosecution. I mean, they're going to bring the charges now. They have to. They said it. But this may be them saying, like Alec Baldwin's team calling their bluff, saying, you're not going to charge him. No way. They charge him. Maybe they're putting pressure on to get him to plead to this negligent handling of a firearm. Maybe that's some pressure. This happens sometimes. The media is used as pressure in all sorts of lawsuits. We saw it throughout the Deshaun Watson case. We've seen it in tons of cases. It would not surprise me at all. Based on the number of interviews, I don't really know why prosecutors would do this many interviews like she's doing, But to me, it could add some pressure that could get them to plea. And then everybody kind of looks like a hero. We got Alec Baldwin. Here's his, criminal charges. But Alec Baldwin can say, listen, I just pled to it to get it over with. And, it's just a suspended sentence. I'm not a convicted felon. It's a misdemeanor. I don't know. That's a guess, right? That's speculation.
Ethical for a prosecutor to talk about plea negotiations or potential plea deals.
Were they given a heads up that this was coming?
Yes.
They were.
They
And
were.
how did those discussions?
See, and exactly. They were given a heads up this was coming. So they knew this was going to happen. They're not going to arrest them. They're going to do some kind of surrender and release. It's not going to be a situation where they show up at Alec Baldwin's house with all the cameras and arrest him.
We have been in, I would say, almost constant communication with the opposing parties' counsels for about the last 6 weeks. They didn't know exactly what was coming, but they were aware that we were contemplating charges, and they were aware of what the contemplated charges were.
And just two more questions. So what happens next? So once these
We knew this because they asked for additional funds for this case and for a special prosecutor.
charges are filed, which I assume is tomorrow, right? Is that the plan?
It'll be before the end of this month.
Before the end of this month. So then what happens? Are these defendants then required to come back to New Mexico, or will they be placed under arrest? How does that work?
No, we will not be asking for an arrest. In typical cases in this county, the way that we handle it is we'll send out what's called a summons. From that, the court will set what's called a first appearance, or it's basically an arraignment. And at that point, they will either have to come here or they might do a video arraignment. We have been doing those since COVID. And
I mean, listen, this isn't exactly like they're really trying to make an example out of Alec Baldwin and arrest him at his house and drag him in, which they could. They're cooperating with his defense attorneys. And I'll just tell you, about a third of our cases, especially that my dad handles, hire us pre-charge, right? We have a whole discussion about pre-charge before you're charged with the crime, whether it's most of them are federal, but some state as well. If it's something big, an investigation that's happening, you know something's happening, you hire a big shot defense attorney or a big shot firm, and they represent you pre-arrest. They're in contact with law enforcement. Usually it's stuff like this. Now, if they're a heavy hitter criminal, sometimes they will arrest them, drag them in. If they wanted to make an example out of Alec Baldwin, they really could have done him a lot worse than be involved. They don't have to talk to his lawyers. They don't have to. They can do what they do their investigation, and go and arrest him. They don't have to do that. Now, it's more cordial and appropriate to work with the defense lawyers. So they did in this case. They're going to basically give them a piece of paper that says you got to appear by Zoom at a certain date, basically what some of us get with traffic tickets and stuff. So they're not going overly hard at Alec Baldwin where they could. When we're talking involuntary manslaughter, where they could arrest him, set a bond, make him pay something to be out, put him on some sort of tracking. I mean, they could do a lot of things to make his life a lot more difficult than they are. So I think it's important to keep that balanced and understanding as we kind of go forward.
And they will get their conditions of release and enter not guilty pleas.
And finally, last time you and I spoke, which was right after this tragic incident occurred, you told me that you know that there is pressure out there. People either wanting to charge, people not wanting you to charge. One thing you said was, you know there's pressure, you do not feel that pressure, and you will follow the facts, and the prosecution decision will be made on the facts.
Right.
That was at the beginning of the case. Do you still feel the same now, looking backwards? As you know, this obviously got international attention. Can you just talk about that? What was it like trying to conduct this investigation, and was it done in this consistent manner throughout?
Oh, absolutely. Of course, I knew there was pressure. Of course, I knew that people had feelings one way or another, but that happens in every single case. And what's important to me as a prosecutor is treating everyone equally under the law and getting justice for the victims. And so that pressure did not affect me in any way whatsoever. This was a decision based on the facts and the evidence.
Great
Mr.
answer.
Attorney, thank you for your time.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it. Okay, we'll throw it back to you. Obviously, a major decision here that we've been waiting for in this case. Now, actor Alec Baldwin, as well as the armor on set, charged with involuntary manslaughter.
Josh, while you have the DI note, she's short on time. She said something in there that I wanted to see if you could ask her really quick. She said that Alec Baldwin pulled the trigger. Baldwin told ABC he was adamant he did not pull the trigger. She is confident Alec Baldwin pulled the trigger?
Yeah, so my colleague Kate is
We said this from the jump, and when we got the FBI report, we knew how this was going to go. Regardless of what a criminal defendant says, if your expert's telling you he pulled the trigger, the state's going to believe their expert.
asking. So Baldwin has said that he didn't pull the trigger. Obviously, we know the FBI report says that that gun could not have gone off cocked without pulling the trigger. Are you confident that he actually pulled the trigger?
Yes, absolutely. The FBI lab is one of the best in the world, and we absolutely believe that the trigger had to have been pulled in order for that gun to go off. The trigger was pulled.
So that your assessment is based on that FBI analysis at Quantico, looking at the gun itself and how it operated?
That's right. And that's one of the reasons that this investigation did take a long time. We were waiting on that, trying to make sure we had all of the evidence and were able to gather absolutely everything. We were sure of these charges before we filed them.
Great. Thank you, ma'am. Okay, back to you.
Josh, does she know how that live round got on that set?
Yeah, and one question which we've had is, do you know how the live round actually got on the set?
We don't. And we might not ever know the answer to that question. And I do believe that's a bit of a red herring. The point is, live rounds were there.
Red herring meaning we don't even need to talk about it for the jury. It's not important. It's not something. It's something that's a distraction because how it got there doesn't matter. The point is they didn't know it got there. They should have known it got there. They should have removed it. They should have had a safe set, and he should have felt it in the gun, and he should have never pointed the gun. So whether or not how it got there, he should have never pointed the gun at Helena Hutchins. How it got there, he should have never pulled the trigger. That's the state's point of view. And that's what they have to argue, because Alec Baldwin's defense is going to point out, it's like he had nothing to do with it getting there. There were other people that were supposed to make sure it didn't get there. He paid other people to make sure that a live round did not get on that set. What else can he do? So is it really reasonable that Alec Baldwin should have checked every single bullet in a Western movie that came on set? It's going to be up to a jury to decide.
And they weren't checked. They should have been caught. 3 people should have been checking those projectiles and should have caught them.
But that wasn't a major decision in your determination to actually charge here.
Correct.
Okay. And do you think that, I mean, obviously you look at the facts of this case, but you mentioned before how surprised you were to see the lack of safety on this set. Are you also trying to maybe send a message to other, people out there making movies that, look, there will be consequences? Is that part of your decision?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In New Mexico, we want you to come here. We want you to film movies, but we want you to do it safely. And we certainly want to get justice for anyone that is a victim. Like in this case, we want to get justice for Helena Hutchins.
Yeah, and that is key. Obviously, we've been hearing, Kate, that there was a victim in this case, which we have to remember. Cinematographer Helena Hutchins, although this appears to be an accident, she lost her life in this incident, Kate.
Absolutely. Josh, thank you very much for the great interview. And please thank the district attorney for it.
All right. So that's interview number 1. I'm going to get to some of the questions here because I see a familiar name and face here, Ron. As a film AD, because Ron was in here a lot when we talked about this case earlier. As a film AD, I can say number 1 priority running a set is safety. The AD handed the gun to Alec Baldwin and admitted to police he should have checked all rounds inside the barrel after the armor passed it to him. And then Ron continues. Argument can be made the armor is more culpable than AD, but talent third in that error chain. So he's saying that the armor, Gutierrez Reed, potentially number 1, the AD Hall is number 2, and then Alec Baldwin, the least culpable. The armor is SME, but AD must see the move demoed and ensure safety for every take. AB2, and he knows better. Okay. And I think that's going to be a big portion as to what does he know? What can they prove? And all of that is going to be really important. And Ron, also welcome back to the membership crew. Yoked Tesla, 100% overcharging and using Allen to keep the case in the public's attention. There's no story if his name's not involved. 2 of the 3 should be charged. Alec's job was to act, not to also be the safety team. And again, and this is a good example, right, of who we have on the jury. If somebody on the jury thinks an actor's got no liability here, then they're going to come back with a not guilty verdict. If somebody says that they do have a duty to never, I see a lot of people pointing in the chat or posting in the chat, never point a gun at somebody, whether it's loaded or unloaded. Definitely never pull the trigger while it's pointed at somebody. I don't care if you're making a movie. I don't care what you're doing. You never point the gun at somebody. That's what I've always been taught in gun safety. I'm not a huge gun guy. I do have 1 gun for home safety. That's it though. And every time I go to the range, it's the same stuff. You make sure you point it at the ground, point it away from everybody, even when it's not loaded. So, I mean, I think it's really going to depend on the jury. Why isn't Sarah and her dad charged? Your thoughts, Paul Printed Heart? I don't know. The state, it seems very clear that there were 3 people who, if they just did their job, not even above and beyond, just do your job and no one gets hurt. Yoked Tesla again. They can't make an example out of him. Alec is already going to embarrass them with this fake overcharge for media attention. This attorney is a joke. Okay. I mean, we can agree to disagree as to whether or not there are facts in place to set these charges. I think Alec Baldwin very well could win. Southern Gal, will the DA be able to bring up the settlement? Unlikely. Azam, good morning, Peter. Apart from the A-list actors like George Clooney and Nick Cage, do you think they'll call other actors from the set to testify? Thanks. They're definitely going to be calling people from the set, including Dave Halls, which we'll get to that in one of the future interviews. But they're definitely going to be calling people from the set. Paulie D, sorry, I accidentally unstarred your comment, asked, how is that possibly a red herring? Because how the bullets got on set may not affect whether or not it's negligent to point a gun at somebody and pull the trigger. If I'm putting my state attorney's hat on, that's what I'm arguing why it's a red herring. So Brianna asked, political prosecution. So I don't even know what you mean. I don't know what your politics are, Brianna. And, we don't really talk a lot of politics on this, but most of the stuff I've heard is the anti-gun argument, and that's why they're going hard on this, regardless of what your feelings are. I did think it was interesting that this special prosecutor we're about to meet in this interview is a former district attorney and now a Republican politician. Okay. So whatever you want to say about it, that kind of, I think, goes against some of the political arguments. I'm sure people can still find reasons why it's political. But let's listen to this interview now.
Why charge Alec Baldwin with involuntary manslaughter and not something less?
Well, because it actually fits the statute, if you look at the statute. But he was actually the producer on this film. He was present on scene. He's an actor who's probably starred in 40 plus gun movies, so he's very familiar. And he said, I believe in reports and interviews, that he's very familiar with the use of guns. The gun was not checked by him or with the armor, which is standard protocol where you may not have to check it himself, but he's supposed to check it with her. And had he done that, and of course not pointed a firearm at somebody, that rules of the firearm, you don't point a gun at somebody unless you're intending to actually shoot them. And he did all those things, which ultimately resulted in Helena Hutchins' death.
What tipped the scale and made this a felony case?
Well, to us, it was because the conduct overall by him and Hannah Gutierrez and David Halls was reckless.
There's been a lot of questions about how the weapon was fired. Alec Baldwin says he never pulled the trigger, that he just released the hammer of the gun. What did your findings come up?
Well, that he definitely pulled the trigger, and that's confirmed by the FBI.
He definitely pulled the trigger. This is the special prosecutor I was talking about. He definitely pulled the trigger, she said. Very calm. To me, she seems a little more like a bulldog than the last prosecutor we were listening to.
You believe Alec Baldwin pulled the trigger?
Yes.
And aimed it at Helena Hutchins?
Not intentionally, trying to hurt her or anything, but I believe his conduct was reckless and he did do that.
Do you believe Alec Baldwin should go to prison?
It's not my call right now to believe.
So that's interesting, right? And I thought that was a great question. So you personally, do you think Alec Baldwin should go to prison? Because that carries with it a prison sentence. It's not a misdemeanor. It's not probation. And she doesn't say yes, which that's what leads me to believe if they can get Alec Baldwin to admit anything or plead to anything, I think the state would take it. I think if Alec Baldwin pled to any misdemeanor crime, the state would take it with very little probation, a suspended sentence, no jail time, a slap on the wrist, but to have criminal charges to show and say nobody's above the law. State attorneys love to do that. Nobody's above the law. I had multiple criminal defendants, doctors and people like that, where they said this person felt like he was above the law because he was a big shot doctor or whatever it may be. So that's very common for state attorneys to do.
Believe whether he goes to prison or not. Our focus is to get justice for Helena Hutchins and to let everybody know that just because you're an A-list actor, you're not going to be above the law.
Why charge Hannah Gutierrez-Reed?
Because she was the armorer on the set, and she should have been.
I mean, I think most people agree, and it seems like the chat does too. She's the most culpable. The armorer on the set is the most culpable, in my opinion.
Checking the bullets, checking the guns, checking everything multiple times, never handing it to anyone unless she had personally made sure that all of those bullets were actually dummies. And she clearly didn't do that here. There were also at least 5 other bullets found on the set. They shouldn't have been there. And she should have caught that. That's her job. She should have caught that. And the fact that she didn't means that she gets charged with this.
Do you think?
So what's interesting about this as well is by charging all of them, Hall's pleading, the jury's going to hear that if this goes to jury trial, which probably won't, but they're going to hear that Hall's pled to negligent handling of a firearm, and charging the armorer. That makes Alec Baldwin's case a lot stronger. Those are the culpable parties. They have also been charged with crimes. They're trying to, get a headline with my name, kind of like Yoke Tesla said, and he's going to point the finger at them. And the state also agrees that they committed crimes. However, what's really interesting in these negligence cases, different than intentional cases, because definitely not a conspiracy, right? They didn't work together on purpose to bring this out. So it's not a conspiracy. But in negligence cases, more than one person can and often is negligent in creating the negative result. In tons of our cases, you have to split the percentage of negligence up. And the jury literally has to write down 75% this person, 25% this person, or 40% this person, 20% this person, 40% this person. Has to equal 100%. We literally put that on the verdict form. But it's very common to have to determine percentage of negligence in civil cases. So the state here, they don't have to tell the percentage of negligent, just that each person was negligent to the level to meet involuntary manslaughter. So it's really interesting how akin this is to a civil case.
I think they're both equally culpable here.
I do.
Dave Halls handed the weapon to Alec Baldwin. He yelled out "cold gun" when it was in fact loaded with a bullet. Should he only have probation?
When we really started looking at the case, it wasn't obvious that he did say cold gun, and it wasn't obvious that he actually was the one that handed it to Baldwin. He may have.
See, so I mean, now they're just calling into question everything Alec Baldwin said. It's like, well, because we went easy on him, we're positive that Alec Baldwin pulled the trigger, right? We're positive that he pulled the trigger, but we're not positive Halls was the one that sent him the gun, and we're not positive that Halls was the one that did this or that said this. Very interesting.
Looked at the gun, which he did, but we can't even say for sure that he actually touched that firearm.
What's Dave Halls' role in this? Is he willing to testify against Alec Baldwin and Hannah Gutierrez-Reed?
He will testify. Well, we looked at that aspect because
He will testify. Interesting. Hey, I've got some for everybody in the comments and in the chat. Rachel Mills, percentage of guilt here for me. Hannah 17, 15% David, 10% Baldwin. Let me know. Play civil jury right here. And if we were prosecuting this case against these 3 civil defendants, asking you to split up the negligence, how would you split it up? Make sure it equals 100%. And I'll read through some of them as we go here. Welcome, Selena.
Everyone seemed very concerned with how did live rounds get on the set. And unfortunately, that may be a question we're never going to be able to answer.
This was something that was more than mere negligence. It was people acting recklessly, people not doing their jobs, people not following safety protocols, not following safety standards, and violating all of the standards that we all have to follow if we have a gun in our hands. And so because of that, I would say this is not just an accident. This is a criminal accident.
Coco, I understand. I understand it's not a civil trial, but it is negligence. And negligence is the vast majority of civil trials. So you can learn a lot. Learning on how civil plaintiffs' lawyers prove negligence is exactly what these prosecutors are going to have to do in this case. So much more than the majority of criminal cases that we look at.
Prison is not necessarily the goal. What I want is justice for Helena Hutchins, and I want people to take responsibility and take accountability for what their actions or inactions led to, and that's Helena Hutchins' death.
All right. So we have one more here to listen to. And while we listen to it, I'm going to throw some of these percentages up on screen. And this is about 2 minutes. Some of it is repetitive, but I figured it's out here, so we might as well watch it so we can get the full context of what they're saying. And this one even takes the liberty of clipping in some of Alec Baldwin's words that the state is going to use against him if they are very confident in their FBI expert.
Day of reckoning for Alec Baldwin. Judge Janine interviewing the prosecutors bringing charges against the actor and the Rust film armorer. They are set to face 2 counts of involuntary manslaughter in the tragic death of cinematographer Helena Hutchins. One of the charges could put Baldwin behind bars for a minimum of 5 years. And it looks like this interview Alec Baldwin did is coming back to haunt him.
Who could have seen that
I
coming?
didn't pull the trigger.
So you never pulled the trigger?
No. I would never point a gun at anyone and pull a trigger at them. Never.
The Santa Fe County District Attorney.
So I'll just say right here, for a lot of the people saying this is BS, they're overcharging. I think if he didn't do these interviews, he would have a much better chance of winning at trial. Much better chance.
And special prosecutor telling Judge Janine that Baldwin isn't being truthful, and they say Hutchins would be alive if he had done his job.
We definitely believe he pulled the trigger. The FBI lab report confirms that, so definitely the trigger was pulled.
All right, so his statement is not correct under any circumstance.
We don't believe it is.
Mr. Baldwin had a duty at the base level to never hold a gun and point it at a person while pulling the trigger. But he also had a duty as an actor and a producer on that set to have the bullets checked or to check them himself to make sure that they weren't live.
We believe Baldwin, as a producer, knows everything that goes on this set. And so that, yeah, there was a lot of problems. There was a lot of, there were a couple accidental discharges. There was a lot of safety concerns that were brought to the attention of management, and he did nothing about it. So this was a loose and reckless scene where safety was compromised just to save money.
The decision to charge Baldwin certainly.
There you go. Safety was compromised just to save money. That is literally profits over people, which is used in tons of closing arguments in civil cases.
Not easy given who he is and the media
I think
circus
there's a little bit more.
Did you feel any pressure to go one way or the other?
You know, we looked at this case for a long time, and sure, there's a lot of media attention, and Alec Baldwin's an A-list actor, but again, we were just looking at the facts of the case, and again, Alec Baldwin, he is an A-list actor, and there's a lot of, you know, hype around all that, but he isn't above the law. You know, we don't feel public pressure. We're prosecutors. We're doing the right thing and what the facts support, and we believe it supports involuntary manslaughter.
And here's another interesting part of Judge Janine's interview when she asked if Baldwin was willing to work with investigators.
Did Baldwin cooperate?
Yes, he cooperated in that he did willingly turn over his phone after some negotiations with his lawyers.
And let's get
That was like a backhanded compliment. It's like, did he cooperate? Yes, after we negotiated with his lawyers. Like, yeah, he did cooperate. He cooperated more than a lot of criminal defendants, but did he just like say, come search my house and search my phone? No, because he's not a moron, right? I mean, those questions about cooperating infer guilt if the answer was no to the prosecutor. I wish every answer was no. No, he did not cooperate. Why would he cooperate with us when we're investigating him, trying to throw him in prison? So, you know, I don't like that type of stuff. All right. So those were the interviews. I'm going to get through some questions here before we hop over and talk more Kohberger. Make sure your autoplay, I think it's called, is turned on when we do the redirect here in the next 5 minutes. Carolina, I wonder if this will change how actors' contract is written. Could they add a clause limiting their liability for weapons handling? So you can't usually limit your criminal liability, but it sounds like this prosecutor thinks that it should be rubber guns and fake guns, and we should never have guns, whether you call them prop or real, that could actually cause this result. And I do think she says changes are happening in New Mexico, and that's one of the reasons they want to do this, is they don't want we want movies to be filmed here, she says, is good for the economy, but not like this. They're going to be done safely. And I think a lot are going to follow her lead. Anna S., if they were filming, shouldn't there be video footage on whether he pulled the trigger or not? I think so. And maybe the FBI used that. Kate Carpenter, I don't think the prior complaints of safety are going to help out. Do we know who made the complaints? So it seems like it was a lot of staff people, cameramen, extras that made those complaints. And then there were text messages between some of the higher ups. But I think we wait until we see this actual evidence. John, as a producer who has 3 Emmys, congratulations, John. It's interesting to see other folks, industry folks, stack rank blame. On set, it's one team. There's no first, second, or third until you're looking at 5 years in prison, right? Now, I've seen stuff that's at 18 months, 3 years, 5 years. So we'll see what it actually ends up being with the enhancements. But I mean, that's what happens, John. That's what happens when criminal charges get thrown around. Ron, Halls, the AD, knows 100% his job is safety first. The set is the AD's. All things on the set are the AD. Been like that since the 1900s. He pled knowing he had to. Captain goes down with the ship. Interesting. And I wonder, I mean, the whole team thing John just brought up, maybe Halls is going to be like, we all screwed up. I just took responsibility and they're not. Ugh, that's not going to look good. T-Sky, Alec was told it was a cold gun. Wasn't it reasonable for him to rely on that? So if you listen to their interview, it sounds like it was not clear that he was told it was a cold gun. So what are the other witnesses going to say? Halls, it sounds like it's going to say what he didn't say that. Baldwin obviously is going to say he was told it was a cold gun. So I think that's going to be a question for the jury. Elizabeth Higgins, the prior issues weren't fixed and it is reckless. And that's a lot of time how we prove recklessness is a pattern over and over again. They had a chance to fix this and they didn't. Paw Printed Heart, Hannah, 25%, Baldwin, 50%, Halls, 25%. Last to hold the gun. Barbara, 100% on all 3, in my opinion, did not know how to follow safety protocols. Coast Slack, if there were other accidental discharges, why couldn't his have been accidental? It's a good point, depending on what the definition of accidental discharge is, right? Barbara Rule is a new member. Welcome, Barbara. And Pants with an off-topic question. Curious about the lawyers who were sanctioned for bringing DJT's case. Can they appeal the sanction or are they resigned to pay the fine? I don't know what the actual sanctions are, but usually you can appeal sanctions as a lawyer. And there's a process to go through it. And then if you lose, you pay the fine or do whatever the punishment is that comes with the sanctions. All right, we are going to talk about this case a lot more. I think there's going to be a lot more trickling out about this investigation when the charges come down before the end of the month. So make sure you get your questions in the comment if you're part of the rewatch crew. I know we did this one early in the morning, a little different times, but we're going to say goodbye to Alec Baldwin in this case for now and pick up with Brian Kohberger in that second gag order. Let's talk about why we think the judge did that. So make sure you hop over to the next video. If you've got autoplay on, it should automatically redirect you to our other stream. Thank you so much. Hit the like button on the way out. I don't think I even talked about that. Subscribe if you want to talk more Alec Baldwin in the future. Hit the notifications bell so that you know whenever we talk Alec Baldwin in the future.